Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. Hope you're all doing very well on this day. And we are playing some more Golgari. As has been the case lately, this deck is so fun. And it's going to be a quicker one today. These matches were a lot quicker than some of the absolute just round 15 slugfests I've been showing you lately, like against that Boros Nahiri deck. Some of the longer matchups like Jund and Panza and things like that. Matches will not go quite as long with this video, and our opponent will keep 7. We will keep a fantastic 7 as well. Turn 1 Thoughtseize, 2 forms of interaction beyond that interact with the board. One is our catch-all, and one is a very good early play. And then we have a threat. We've got 3 lands, we've got all our colors. We can't really go wrong with a hand like this. Game 1 in the dark, this is pretty darn good. This is definitely in like the top 80th percentile of hands we can get blind, that is for sure. Our opponent goes Island Pass. This could mean, of course, lots of things here. And we will draw Maelstrom Pulse, so right now it looks like we might have a few too many pieces of permanent removal if they are on a typical blue deck that plays a lot of draw-go and interaction on the stack. That said, turn 1 Thoughtseize is going to be amazing no matter what they're up to, and we see that they are not indeed a typical blue deck in the classical sense. They are spirits, and they are indeed Bant spirits, as we see by the presence of this collected company. I do have a video on the channel against blue-white spirits. Bant is going to be a little different simply because they're splashing green for collected company and noble hierarch. My understanding is that these decks usually continue to play Ether Vial alongside those cards. Maybe not the full 4, maybe more like 3 is stock. And, they're cutting maybe a couple pieces of interaction, of non-spirit interaction, although they are showing me Path to Exile here, but maybe not quite as many paths. Maybe a couple rattle chains are missing, or a couple flex slots, again, like Selfless Spirit, even though they show me it here, but regardless, we've got a very interesting decision here. Now, if you've seen my videos, sometimes I linger on the turn 1 decision a lot. That's because turn 1 discard is so important. So right now, our opponent can only cast Supreme Phantom. That's all they can cast with their hand. So there is an argument for taking that, especially because it's a pretty good card in the matchup. But even though we can go turn 2 Tarmogoyf, they have a Path to Exile, and we don't have another threat yet. So we could continue to not draw a threat, and the game could go on for quite some time. Even if it doesn't go on for all that long, they are still likely to at least reach white mana. And if they draw a white source, they can cast everything in their hand besides the collected company. So, as nice as it would be, I do not think it's realistic to just strand all of these other cards in their hand. So, if we leave that aside, what do we care about? I don't think we care about the Path to Exile. The first path against us is usually very good for us. We can usually find a replacement threat. The ramp is nice. It's all good. Selfless Spirit can be very good against our deck with certain progressions, but we have a pile of spot removal. We're just going to be able to keep 1-for-1ing things as things stand. I don't want to take that. Same deal with Queller. Queller can be very backbreaking against our deck, but we know it's there, which is half the battle. They can't cast it yet, and again, we have loads upon loads of removal. So I do think the Supreme Phantom is actually probably the best candidate of all of those cards. It's either that or collected company. And you know what? I like taking the company here. The game is realistically not going to end in a hurried fashion. We take the card that gives them the best value, because I think if they're just 1-for-1ing us and not getting 2 high value plays for 1 out of that collected company, pretty sure we're just going to beat them. I'm pretty sure we're just going to beat them. Now, anything can happen. We can just draw bricks from here on out, and they can draw gas, but our hand lines up so strongly against their plays for now that I think taking the Coco is correct there. even though they are very, very far away from casting it. Now, as a nod to all of the things I just said, the big piles of removal, we are going to get proactive here. This is good for us in a couple ways. If they find a white source and they want to path this card early, great, we get to ramp. Nice and early. The earlier the better. If not, we get to clock them and be really proactive. So we did the classic BGX strategy of turn 1 discard, turn 2 Tarmogoyf, and now we can just continue interacting. With a handful of really good spells, the Goyf will naturally grow and will pressure the opponent immensely. Realizing that our Goyf staying 2-3 is not very realistic, our opponent will just turn its Phantom sideways, get in for 1. They're not going to be interested in blocking next turn anyway, because they know they need to develop their board and get some synergies rolling to have a chance here. Now, they did find Ether Vial, so while it's not a white source, it is going to eventually get them up and rolling with mana. We draw Inquisition of Kozilek. This is a fine draw. This lets us have a 2-turn play if we want. We can Inquisition, we can Abrupt Decay, and we can hit with a bunch for Goyf. Hit with Goyf for a bunch. Now, I actually don't like that as much as I like simply fetching for another land in Maelstrom Pulsing the Supreme Phantom. So you could argue for the 2-spell turn. You could also argue for Pulsing the Ether Vial. Once again, we're not going to take the Vial for the same reason we didn't take the Phantom. I don't think it's realistic to keep them off of mana. Now, if we were maybe really light on interaction and we only had 1 piece, then yeah, sure. Okay, maybe our best chance is to hope to kind of mana screw them. But here, again, just with the cards in our hand, especially now that we've drawn another form of interaction, we can keep pace with them and indeed hopefully beat them just by 1-for-1ing their things. This is going to grow the Tarmogoyf to a nice healthy 4-5, and our opponent gets to start ticking up their Ether Vial, but they are very much on the back foot right now. Now, they are finding a land, that's good, but again, this is why I didn't pulse the Ether Vial, you know? We're just more interested with the way the progressions are going in this game in answering their permanents, their creatures specifically. Now, of course, our top decking is doing us all kinds of favors. So, another Inquisition is great. What do we do here? Well, the first thing we're going to do is get in with our Tarmogoyf. This is going to make them decide whether or not to path to exile before they see anything else from us. If we had Inquisitioned right off the bat, they probably would have pathed in response. That is my best guess. And then we would miss out on this 4 damage. Now, that said, they're going to think about it, then they're going to path the Goyf anyway. This is totally fine for us, same result as the Inquisition. And like I said at the beginning of the game, the first path is never that bad for us, especially because we have indeed found a second threat. It's one we have to continually invest mana in, but a threat nevertheless. And if you saw my Boros Nahiri video, you will know just how good of a threat Treetop Village can be. So, we're going to Inquisition, we're going to see the Unknown as a phantasmal image. Pretty nice opportunity to just get this Queller out of their hand, and then, of course, we get to Inquisition again. I think we're beyond the point where Decaying Vial is on the table. We just want to keep stripping their cards out of their hand. Now, you could make an argument for trying to strand the image in their hand, but again, we don't want to assume they won't draw any more gas. I like taking the image because image can copy our Tarmogoyfs, image can copy Manlands, image is actually kind of a scary card. It's not that scary, again, because we have a lot of answers, and because even it takes away Trophy's downside, you cast it, it gets sacked in response. That's all great, but I am so confident that we can just keep 1-for-1ing them that I am taking away their plays with the highest ceiling. And yeah, they're going to draw an Ether Vial. That's pretty bad for them. Now they are kind of out of gas, top deck mode. We still have removal in hand, so pretty clearly here just going to get to clear away their board. Fire up the old veteran Treetop Village, veteran of so many campaigns, and start crashing in with it. 3 a turn, putting the opponent on the ropes. We're going to hold the Verdant Catacombs in hand, Conceals Information, Feel for Tireless Tracker, fuel for collective brutality, all the good stuff. So it's worth pointing out this Moorland Haunt. This is a fantastic card against us. It can potentially shrink our Tarmogoyfs, not in a matchup like this that we've just killed too many things, but it can play tricks on us, shrinking our Goyfs, taking away our Scavenging Ooze fuel, and of course any card that grinds this well is definitely good against us. So this is giving them a bit of a lifeline. It's also, the one thing that is nice about their double vial play is they'll be able to hold up basically anything they draw, while continuing to use their Moorland Haunt. So even though we've had a nice progression, the Haunt is definitely going to get a lot of value for them. And fortunately, our Treetop Village tramples this is so good. It's not even probably worth assigning the block for them, even though their life total is starting to get low. Yep, no vial activation, no block, they're just going to take the 3. We will not hold up our Hissing Quagmire here. That's pretty clearly something we want to deploy. Both because it comes in tapped and because it's a threat on its own, could become quite relevant. Of course, we're going to lean on the Treetop Village first, but they could answer it. Or the game could go to a point where we're activating both. So they've got 2 unknowns in hand, and they're turning their token sideways, which is interesting. I know they certainly have to end the game here at some point. We're drawing more Treetop Villages. Okay, you know, that's not really what we want to see, but it's also not the worst. It lets us really fearlessly animate this, because not only are we holding up Assassin's Trophy, we've got another one where that came from. A little bit of a misplay from our opponent here. Not that pathing this thing is a misplay, that's totally fine, but they should have made us attack first, because now we get to float green in response and use that green to animate our Hissing Quagmire. Then the path will resolve, we'll go get another land, and we get to crash in for 2. And we're not too worried even if they have a creature, they vial it in and trade. That's very fine. Death Touch is quite relevant sometimes as an attacker when your opponent is on the back foot, as they are here. So we get to get in for 2, we play yet another manland, and it looks like our manlands are just what we're going to ride to victory here. Hopefully, that is the idea. They do have a Rattle Chains. I'm always kind of happy to see that resolve when it's not blowing us out with its ETB trigger. Definitely can be very, very good against us. They're getting in for 3. That's pretty aggressive. I expected them to sit back and try to assign some really high-level blocks, especially here because they cannot activate Moorland Haunt. Pretty awkward for them to draw a 1-drop, something they cannot vial in. Also worth noting that they don't have 4 actual lands, so they're still unable to cast a top-decked Collected Company. So we're in really good shape. Liliana of the Veil was a fantastic draw here. Absolutely fantastic. Even though it's a little clunky looking, there are better draws, don't get me wrong. But anything that kills a thing right now is fine with me. So we're just going to finally deploy that land we've been sandbagging, because we want to be able to hold up Assassin's Trophy. Then we'll play our Lily, take her down. They are trying to put the clock on us too, so she forces them to deviate from that plan a little bit, presumably. At least send one attacker her way. Maybe we can let it live with the trophy. We'll have to see what they show us. So they're down to 3. Things are looking great for us. And they're still... Will they, won't they? Yeah, they're going to turn them both sideways. They're going to send one at me and one at Liliana. So I'm going to fetch. And I think I should trophy here. There is a minor downside. If they top-decked a Collected Company, we're going to give them a basic land. Maybe that's more than a minor downside, right? Because that might be the only card that can beat us, is if they Coco into 2 really good things and then maybe draw another Coco. So maybe I should have just let all this happen instead of risking that. But we are not punished for that because they don't have a Coco, they have something out of the vial. Spell Queller. Sure. Fair enough. So Queller is going to take away the trophy. No big deal. Lily goes down. We take a couple points of damage. We draw a Tireless Tracker, but they are close enough to death, and the tracker gets us no immediate value, so it's time to just fire up both of our manlands. As I said, there may come a point in the game where they're both relevant, and here it is. They're gonna take the block with the Queller. Okay, they don't want to trade with the Hissing Quagmire. They would rather just chump, basically. Yeah, I don't know about this. I think they should have at least gotten our Quagmire off the field and had a chance to potentially rebuild, but we get the trophy, we get to get the Rattle Chains out of here. And they forget to activate the Moorland Haunt, so opponent may be just going through the motions here because they are pretty far behind, or maybe just misclicking. Now they remember the Haunt, but they're going to main phase it. Alright, that's a little late for that, but, they've got two things on board. They main phased it so they could get another point across. Okay, fair enough, but I don't really know what they can have here. And now they can't have anything that beats a Fatal Push, right? So we're just drawing really well, it must be said, considering the fact that we've only had one real threat all game, one actual creature, Tarmogoyf. Yep, they're going to vial something in. It's a Spell Queller. We get to Fatal Push the token in response, and they are just dead. Now again, the opponent missed a little bit of a trick. They could have sacrificed the Mausoleum Wanderer, double blocked, and then still technically been alive. But at this point, that wouldn't matter. They're just going to be dead on board next turn. I guess Coco is a potential out off the top, but that's about it. Anyway, maybe one or two missed lines from our opponent there near the end, but we had a very, very commanding position regardless. Now, do note that the evasion of the Spirits deck and the fact that they're not without power, they're not without attacking power, that is for sure. So even when we were heavily, heavily, heavily disrupting them, answering things very efficiently, they still were able to knock us down to 7. It wasn't the safest life total I've ever been at, that is for sure. And if we had missed a trick or two, if some of these man-land draws had just been regular lands, we might have been in trouble. But as it was, we interacted so well, and this is an example of how, our spread of interaction, a mix of hand disruption, of hyper-efficient creature removal, and of catch-all answers like Decay and Pulse and Trophy, it just lines up so well against so much of Modern. And once again, very, very honorable mention goes to the good old Treetop Village. So we got there against Bant Spirits, so good game. We're going to go to the sideboard here and then come back. I'm not actually going to show a sideboard tech. I will link to my sideboard tech against Blue-White Spirits. I will link to that video. Our sideboarding against Bant Spirits is going to be very similar. The major changes are going to be, I believe I cut all 3 Thoughtseizes away against Blue-White Spirits, and I left all 3 Inquisitions in. Here, we're going to want to leave the Thoughtseizes in over the Inquisitions, simply because they can take away Collected Company. And as we saw by taking this away turn 1, that is a high priority thing to do. We also might want to leave in 1 Inquisition, so maybe we're leaving in 1 more discard spell than we did against Blue-White, but otherwise it's pretty much the same. It's fairly conservative sideboarding. We're going to bring in Languish for sure, possibly Damnation, probably another Collective Brutality, Engineered Explosives, and another Maelstrom Pulse, stuff like that. We're going to cut away at the discard and maybe trim away at the edges, like lose 1 Assassin's Trophy, something like that. But regardless, you can check out the link in the description below to my Blue-White Spirits match if you want to see me talk about that more in depth. But otherwise, we will move on to Game 2, see what we can do post-side on the draw. Alright everybody, we are back here, Game 2 on the draw against Bant Spirits, and our hand is sweet. We've got just that slight imbalance in favor of too many lands, but on the draw, seeing an extra card before we even begin playing, I don't mind that as much. We also have just a fantastic pair of cards for the early interaction. We're almost certainly going to go turn 1 Blooming Marsh into Thoughtseize, turn 2 Hissing Quagmire, which is nice to resolve this early, and then Fatal Push something. And then we're all clear to cast Liliana on curve if the coast is clear for that. So and we can even answer that Moorland Haunt if they're on that plan again, and it becomes a big problem. So even before we see any draws, our hand is quite good. I like this a lot, and our opponent's mulled to 6, so even better. Our opponent is happy with their 6. Temple Garden tapped. Fine with me. We draw another Liliana. That's just fine as well. It can either be a free pitch to our existing Liliana, or it can be multiple Lilianas edicting them out of the game. Both seem pretty good. Now, our opponent has more of a balanced spread as far as land versus spells this turn, or this game. Yep, they've got all 3 colors of mana. They're a little bit green heavy, but they can cast everything. And so what do we get? What do we want to take? Once more, we don't care about the path to exile, partially because the first path is fine for us, and partially because we don't have anything to path yet, unless we're animating Hissing Quagmire. So it's either Drogskull Captain or Supreme Phantom. I think Captain is the pretty clear take here, because we can... this is almost certainly going to incentivize them to play the Phantom next turn unless they draw something better, or something they can hold up at instant speed like Rattle Chains, and then we can just push it. So, yeah, pretty clear take there. See what our opponent does. Botanical Sanctum. Yep, Supreme Phantom. Beautiful. Oh, Abrupt Decay, such a good draw, too. Of course, a lot of people are not playing Decays like they used to. It's usually just a one of in most people's 75, sometimes not even that. But against, like, these blue-based tribal decks, like Spirits and Merfolk and even Humans has the element of blue, this card is still so good. So happy to see it here. We stick to plan A, Fatal Push, Hissing Quagmire, back to you. And already I'm feeling pretty far ahead. Oh, wow. Oh, wow, this is just perfect for us. Geist of Saint Traft is one of the hardest cards for us to answer sometimes, but we have the cleanest answer in our deck, ready to be deployed, on curve, and that would be Liliana of the Veil, so we get to edict that thing away and pass. Good old Treetop Village is in hand, so we finally have an efficient threat as well. Things are looking up, my friends. Things are looking up. Oh, opponent realizes they need blue mana for whatever they're about to do. Drogskull Captain. Yeah, fine draw. Oh boy. And they play out a land. This is just perfect. Honestly, just perfect. So we get to take up the Lily, get that Path to Exile out of their hand. That feels pretty good. At this point, with our Lily ready to edict and not going to be attacked by anything next turn, we are pretty free to pitch the other one because we've gotten so much value out of our existing one. The other reason we do that is we get to play the Tassiger this turn, but in order to do that, we have to play an untapped land. So we don't really want to pitch the Treetop Village because, as we know, that card is the filth. So sequencing this way allows us to just run out the Tassiger. We are just feeling like $1,000,000 over here. Definitely good. Now our opponent goes, just draw and then pass. They're at 4 mana. That always makes me a little worried about Collected Company. But the best way to draw out a company is to attack first. They might be interested in firing it off here. They might have a reasonable block if they have it. They don't fire it off. Maybe they don't have it. So here we'll play out our Treetop Village, and we will take up the Lily. Alright, they've got an instant speed play in response. Spell Queller. Well, this just gets better and better for us, doesn't it? Just gets better and better and better, because now we get to Field of Ruin away some lands, doesn't really matter what. I guess we'll try to take them off white. And then we get a Revolt trigger, and it's Fatal Push time. So we have successfully emptied their hand, just as if they didn't, just as if they had something that they just had to discard, and we had to discard our Fatal Push. So even though they played around that about as well as they could, we were able to keep pace. We are very far ahead. They draw Noble Hierarch. Definitely not the best. We draw Thoughtseize also, to be fair. Definitely not the best. Now, what do we do here? Liliana Edict feels pretty clean. Liliana Tick-Up feels pretty fine. And then either one of those allows us to animate the Treetop Village. But here's what I did. You could argue that we're just supposed to animate the village and start clocking as fast as possible. But here's what I'm thinking. So, like, this Thoughtseize is going to be discarded to Liliana eventually. Maybe even this turn, right? So, Tassiger's ability is only going to be good now. Or at least potentially good now before that Thoughtseize hits the bin. They're just going to keep giving us that Thoughtseize back. It's not going to do anything. So we will mill that over now. That's just perfect. We mill away a couple lands we don't want. We get the Fatal Push back. We get to cleanly push the Hierarch, which was a free card, and tick up the Lily, increasing her loyalty. She now represents 2 kill spells, 2 edicts, and we get a free attack with the Tassiger. Life is good. They find another 1-drop off the top. Definitely not what they're looking for. So here, now it's time we're starting to roll the Lily down. Fire up the Treetop. Send in the goons. You take 7. I'm going to hold my fetch land for all of the typical reasons. Our opponent will play an Ether Vial. Yep, not going to cut it. Not going to cut it. Good game, well played. So yeah, they top-decked, let's see, Spell Queller, which is potentially good against Liliana and stuff like that. So that's not a bad top deck. Spell Queller into Noble Hierarch, into Wanderer, into Ether Vial. Now, they could do some work with those cards if we weren't so far ahead already, right? Like, Mausoleum Wanderer is one of the best 1-drops in the format, in my opinion. This card is completely insane value. Noble Hierarch, obviously, is of really high utility. The Exalted can be relevant. Very relevant for a Mono Dork, anyway. And all that good stuff. Ether Vial was never really going to be a desirable top deck, but hey, that's the cost of playing that card. That really is. So, yeah, but we were just so far ahead, it was not even, like, even some very good top decks, I was still pretty confident. Like, we had such value from the Liliana, we had a nice clock. Spirits are going to struggle to tangle with a 4/5. They really are going to struggle to tangle with a Tassiger unless they are rolling with, like, 3 or more creatures either down on the field or in hand able to be played at instant speed somehow. Yeah, Tassiger, like, this card is great in this deck. Really, really great. Sometimes so mana efficient, card advantage, and a realistic threat that, again, a 4/5 on paper is not that impressive anymore in Modern, but in the context of our deck where we disrupt heavily, we remove heavily, we get recursive value from our Planeswalkers, and we have some supplementary attackers that are quite decent on their own, a 4/5 is actually a very scary clock. And as we saw, Tassiger also had us have a really neat turn where we bought back a Fatal Push. We got such good value out of that. It let us get card advantage, it let us clear the way for a 4-point of attack, and it let us take up our Liliana. Very, very nice. So, all things considered, our opponent did not have the most back-breaking Bant Spirits draws or anything like that, but their hands were actually pretty reasonable both games. Like, they mulled to a very reasonable 6 this game, and game 1 they had a 7 that was absolutely full of gas, to be honest, and the only thing it lacked was mana sources, and they found those pretty much right on curve. So, definitely not the best draws I've ever seen from Bant Spirits, but definitely not bad ones either. Far from a free win as far as their end of things were going. But we just had 2 really nice opening hands into some really decent draws. And, man, I'm telling you, this deck has the tools to tangle with just about everything in Tier 1, including both variants of Spirits. Like, I actually have been struggling a little bit more against humans than against spirits, which, could just be variance. Even if you play a lot, any one person's sample size is not the most relevant. All those disclaimers added in. But yeah, spirits, I think we're pretty good against spirits. I truly do. So, yeah, good games, well played. I hope that was an entertaining and, informative match in terms of how to approach this matchup, when to focus on grinding and when to focus on turning the corner and ending the game quickly. The value of certain cards in the matchup, all that good stuff. And of course, we saw the value of Liliana of the Veil, because don't forget about Geist of Saint Traft. That is a card that can kind of stop our deck in its tracks, as good as our spot removal can be. We need either an Edict effect or a Wrath or a good blocker to deal with that Geist. So try to always play with the Geist in mind. Like, ask yourself at the beginning of every decision, when it's a relevant point in the matchup, what happens if my opponent has a Geist? Definitely can be a big wrench in our plans. But other than that, I think we're pretty darn good against both Spirit variants. So, as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're enjoying the content. And if you're interested in any kind of a deck like this, I hope you give this build a shot. It is really fun. It is really good in my opinion. So, I hope you have a great day. Thanks as always for tuning in, and I will see you for the next video.